Elbow greetings to everybody. This is Vathiswa Zikishe, and I coordinate crew in the Eastern Cape province. In this presentation, I'm going to be telling you about the node capacity and the progress that we made so far, and 2019 to 2020 field trip, because 2020 technically didn't happen, so we didn't give any presentation last year. And I'm going to be talking briefly to you about the two mini projects that we did through the research assistance in the Amatole and Ponoland areas, and the highlights of the City Nature Challenge. Okay, this is the Eastern Cape, where I'm based, and I'm based in Grahamstown. The dots that you see are the groups that I work with in the Eastern Cape. So just to note that in the Eastern Cape, a group is sometimes made out of an individual. Like in the Eastern Cape, Drakensberg, we have one person based there, and then here in Port St. John's, we also have one person and 3 or 4 people in other groups. And I think the biggest group in the Eastern Cape is St. Francis and PE. But that means I go to all the groups in the Eastern Cape and do field work with them. And that's myself conducting the crew node activities in the Eastern Cape. Over the past 2 years, I had an intern, a Groensevenza intern, Pamela Skagya, who finished beginning of this year. So currently I'm just by myself and my tiny groups. So the progress that we made so far is like currently we have species of conservation concern, or taxa of conservation concern, at 579. And to date, we have monitored 140 of those species, that excluding the null records, which is the species that we went out for and we didn't find. So in total, we have monitored 24% of those species, which means we still have a long way to go. But because of the context in the Eastern Cape of those like individuals working in this in the Eastern Cape and contributed to this 24%, I choose to celebrate that tiny progress. And the species there that you see are some of the highlights that we made, but I'm going to talk more to you about some of the highlights that we made in the 2019-2020 field season. Okay, 2019 and 2020, we prioritized the Kucha area up to Utenake, because it's the area that we felt that it's our gap area. It's the area that we have not been reaching in terms of doing our species of conservation concern monitoring. And these are the highlights from the Kucha COP, Strelitzia junctia, which is the vulnerable species, and Orthopterum kuchana, critically endangered, which is also like a critical habitat species, Zygophyllum diverticatum, which is listed as endangered, and Bergeranthus. So these two, the Orthopterum and Zygophyllum, are Kucha endemic species. And then the Von Stadens and surrounding areas, because of the lockdown, we didn't get access to some of the areas that we aimed to go to in Utenake. We aimed to go to Springs Nature Reserve and also Longmore State Forest, but because of the lockdown restrictions, we couldn't get to. So Von Stadens was the easiest place for us to access, and these are the highlights from the Von Stadens areas. The Cyclopia pubescens, which is like around, it's found on the lowland fynbos from the PE area, and it's critically endangered. Paranormus reflexus, which is like a mountain species around Von Stadens, and Selago rotandifolia, which we find on the wetlands near Von Stadens. And then from our side, Albany and Amatoles, these are the highlights. Euryopes hypnoides, which is vulnerable. We collected this Euryopes at one of the ECPTA nature reserves, a place called Beggars Bush. which is sadly very infested or heavily infested with alien, like your hakia and your black wattle, but this species managed to survive and still there in abundance. And the other one from the Amatoles, an area called Simo near Fort Beaufort, it's Bergeranthus albopaginatus, vulnerable, and also like a critical habitat species. Like that is species that is confined in a certain area. So it's a very like a habitat specialist species. And then in Amatole and Pondoland project, towards the end of last year, we managed to recruit 2 research assistants, one based in Pondoland or based in Port St. John's, and the other one based in the Amatole. We identified these 2 areas as our like medicinal plant hotspots in the Eastern Cape. And through the work of the research assistants, we identified about 3 species of medicinal plants that are overly or that are being overly harvested. And just to know that the selection of these species was not really done scientifically, but it was just by the word of mouth, which is why we chose to work with people that are from these communities who know what's going on in this community. So for Port St. John's, for instance, we chose to work with Tutani Mbunga, who is also like the member of the community who's so passionate about keeping Port St. John's as natural as it is. So together with Tutani, we identified 3 species that he is gonna just map the distribution just to say where are these species in Port St. John's, around Port St. John's, and how much are they, and are they being harvested? So we chose Stangeria areopus, which is vulnerable, and Prunus africana and Clivia robusta for Port St. John's. And for Amatole, we chose Alepidia amatimbika, endangered, and Bowie volubilis and Ganera. Ganera papensa is a least concerned species, but it's also like overly harvested in that area. As I mentioned, that the selection criteria for this species was not really scientifically based. And for Amatole, the way I went about choosing these species, because I've been doing field work there and then been working in the Piri, and I am from Stutterheim as well. So I kind of know what species that are being overly harvested. So a Prunus africana, for instance, this is the only remaining population that we know of around Pondoland, and it's the only, like here, this is Tutani, the research assistant, showing the destruction made by back harvesting on Prunus. And Stangeria areopus, you get 2 forms, the forest and the grassland form. So what we noticed is that the grassland form is mostly harvested as opposed to the forest form, and we just don't know the reason behind that, because also part of this project was to talk to communities, like we do household interviews just to find out stories behind stories about these plants, but we didn't get to that yet. The aim for now is just to map their distribution and see and look at their abundance. And Amatoles, Alepidia amatimika, is quite rare. We found this one near Simo, like Carpet Pass area. But like in most areas of the Amatole range, it's very rare to find the species. You will find it on the higher altitude where it's not easily accessible by the plant harvesters. And for Pondoland, it was quite difficult to go for 3 species, but then we just chose those that together with Tutani, we agreed that these are like mostly harvested species, but these are also some of the species that are from Pondoland. Clivia robusta is one of the species that I mentioned, but we went there in Pondoland to look for Clivia robusta. So according to Tutani, this is Clivia robusta, but because it was not flowering, we couldn't identify it. So I'm calling it Clivia species because also with Clivia species, like the plant harvesters don't really differentiate species, they just go for any Clivia. So for now, we're calling it Clivia species until we know. And then these other 2 are also being used medicinally, like Acridocarpus natalis and Van natalis. And they both are okay in the forest, and the vernacular name for them is called Umaibope wehlati. But I just don't know why is it that they prefer the pink flower one to that yellow one. But it's also one of those stories that I think when we do like work further in this project, we'll discover. And then the other one was Sisampelos torolosa, which was one of the students from TUT is working on like documenting two Sisampelos species occurring in the Eastern Cape, Sisampelos torolosa and capensis. Okay, and then the highlights from the City Nature Challenge. During the City Nature Challenge, we did about 5 sites, and this is a highlight from each of the sites. This one is Rapania Giliana from the Nelson Mandela University, and then the other one, Delosperma Hollandia from the site called Westering. We didn't know at the time. For me, it was just like an unusual Delosperma, and then I took a picture, and then it turned out to be Delosperma Hollandia, which is critically endangered, presumed extinct. And Agathosma honaquensis, also around PE, like most of its habitat has been developed on. So we were happy to see it at Parsons Flay, which is an area that is now going to be under conservation. They're busy drawing the management plan. So, sorry, I don't know, Rupert, how do I get rid of this?
There you go.
No, I wanted to show, can you guys see the Erica chloroloma?
Yes, I see it. Well.
Okay, this was from Sardinia Bay, and a species of conservation concern. And then Hania is not a species of conservation concern, but it's my favorite species from my personal highlight from the City Nature Challenge. And then, of course, our first new species, or should I say my first new species from the Eastern Cape called Cras orthona. It's a species now for now, but I'm hoping for it to be called Vathiswiensis or something like that, but it must have my name on it. And this is my daughter, Lunati, who gets to see all the beautiful places that I go to. And I thank you.